The survivor of the Purple Chamber, Flavius Claudius Julianus, was born in the Purple Chamber of the imperial palace at Constantinople in 331 AD. But his royal blood was more of a curse than a blessing. His uncle was the formidable Constantine the Great, the emperor who had not only legalized Christianity, but had thrown the full weight of the Roman state behind it, forever altering the spiritual landscape of the Western world. When Constantine died in 337, a brutal and bloody power struggle erupted among his sons. What followed was a palace massacre. The Christian soldiers of Constantine's heir, Constantius II, rampaged through the imperial quarters, systematically executing any male relative who could potentially pose a threat to the new emperor's rule. Julian's father was murdered. His older brother was murdered. Uncles and cousins were cut down. The 6-year-old Julian, along with his sickly half-brother Gallus, were among the only survivors, spared perhaps due to their youth and seeming insignificance. But Julian never forgot the sight of the blood-stained soldiers, men who professed to follow the gentle Christ, murdering his family. This formative trauma instilled in him a deep-seated suspicion and quiet revulsion for the faith his uncle had championed. He and Gallus were raised as state prisoners, shuffled between remote, isolated estates in Asia Minor, their lives under the constant paranoid watch of their cousin, the Emperor Constantius II. They were given a strictly Christian education, forced to read the scriptures and live an almost monastic existence. But for Julian, this forced indoctrination had the opposite effect. It fueled a secret, burning intellectual rebellion, the secret pagan, while publicly conforming to the demands of his Christian tutors. Julian began to lead a double life. He was a brilliant and voracious student, and he found his true solace not in the Gospels, but in the forbidden texts of the classical world. He devoured the works of Homer, Plato, and the Neoplatonist philosophers. He saw in Hellenism the ancient culture of Greece and Rome a world of beauty, reason, intellectual freedom, and a vibrant pantheon of gods who embodied the complex glories of the human condition. In secret, he sought out pagan tutors and philosophers, men who still clung to the old ways, under the guidance of the philosopher Maximus of Ephesus, a charismatic Neoplatonist and practitioner of theurgy, a form of ritual magic. Julian was secretly initiated into the Eleusinian and Mithraic mysteries. He became a devout, passionate pagan, not just for political reasons, but with the fervent zeal of a true convert. He saw the Galileans, as he contemptuously called the Christians, as proponents of a joyless, irrational superstition, a disease that was destroying the glorious intellectual and cultural heritage of the Roman world. He hid his true beliefs perfectly, playing the part of a pious Christian prince while his soul burned with the fire of Olympus. The scholar becomes a Caesar Emperor Constantius II, a man perpetually haunted by the fear of usurpation, had a problem. The Roman frontiers were under constant pressure. In the west, the German tribes were pouring across the Rhine into Gaul. In the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire was a constant, formidable threat. Childless and unable to be everywhere at once, Constantius needed a subordinate to command the legions in Gaul. In a move born of desperation, he summoned his last living male relative, the 24-year-old scholar Julian, from his studies in Athens. In 355, Julian was named Caesar of the West, a junior emperor. It was a poisoned chalice. Constantius likely expected the bookish, inexperienced philosopher to fail, to be killed in battle, or to be easily controlled from afar. He surrounded Julian with his own loyal generals and gave him little real authority. But Julian, the quiet scholar, revealed an astonishing and completely unexpected talent for military command. He threw himself into the role with the same intensity he had applied to his studies. He earned the respect of the hardened legionaries by sharing their hardships, sleeping on the hard ground, and eating the same simple rations. He proved to be a brilliant and courageous strategist. At the Battle of Argentorum, Strasbourg, in 357, Julian, with only 13,000 men, faced a massive German tribal army of over 30,000 in a stunning victory of disciplined tactics over brute force. His legions decisively crushed the Germans, securing the Rhine frontier and making Julian a military hero. The quiet scholar had become a Caesar in both name and deed. The reluctant Augustus Julian's stunning success in Gaul was a cause for both celebration and deep suspicion back in the imperial court. Emperor Constantius II was pleased that the border was secure, but terrified by his cousin's soaring popularity with the army. He saw a potential rival, a new Constantine rising in the west. In 360, under the pretext of needing reinforcements for the Persian front, Constantius ordered Julian to dispatch a huge portion of his best legions, the very men who had won the victories with him to the east. The Gallic legions were outraged. They were being stripped from their charismatic commander and sent to a distant, unpopular war, leaving their own homes and families vulnerable. They refused to go. In a dramatic scene in the city of Lutetia, modern Paris, the soldiers gathered at Julian's palace. They surrounded it, beating their shields and chanting his name. They lifted the philosopher general on a shield, the traditional acclamation for a new emperor, and proclaimed him Augustus. Julian's own writings claim he was horrified, that he resisted this dangerous usurpation. But whether his reluctance was genuine or a piece of masterful political theater, the outcome was the same. He had been proclaimed emperor by the army, and to refuse would mean certain death. He accepted the purple, setting the stage for a new Roman civil war, a clash between the pagan Caesar in the west and the Christian Augustus in the east. The final decisive confrontation seemed inevitable. But as Julian marched his army east to meet Constantius, fate intervened. The Emperor Constantius II, already ill, died of a fever, naming Julian as his lawful successor on his deathbed. Julian entered Constantinople in 361 not as a rebel, but as the sole, undisputed ruler of the Roman Empire. The pagan restoration, once securely in power, Julian wasted no time in revealing his true self. The mask of the pious Christian was cast aside, and he publicly declared his allegiance to the old gods. He was Julian the Apostate, the man who would turn back the tide. He immediately issued an edict of religious toleration, ending the persecution of all faiths, including the various Christian sects that had been fighting each other. On the surface, it was an enlightened policy, but its true aim was to weaken the Christian church by allowing its bitter internal divisions to fester. He then began his ambitious program of pagan restoration. He reopened the ancient temples, cleaned and reconsecrated their altars, and restored their confiscated lands and revenues. He led public sacrifices to the gods, a spectacle not seen from an emperor in decades. He tried to create an organized pagan church, a structured hierarchy modeled on the Christian system, with priests, a defined theology based on Neoplatonism, and a focus on charity and moral living. He wanted to reform paganism, to strip it of its superstitious elements and transform it into a sophisticated, philosophical faith that could intellectually challenge Christianity. His most famous and provocative act was the School Edict of 362. This law forbade Christians from teaching classical literature and philosophy, Homer, Plato, and the great texts of Hellenism. His reasoning was cutting. If the Christians believed these texts were filled with falsehoods about profane gods, then they should stick to teaching their own scriptures. Matthew and Luke. It was a clever and devastating blow, an attempt to sever Christianity from the intellectual heritage of the Roman world and relegate it to an uncultured ghetto. The fateful march on Persia, while Julian waged his war of ideas at home, he knew that his ultimate legitimacy as a Roman emperor would be forged. As always on the battlefield, he needed a great military victory to rival his uncle Constantine's triumphs and to win the favor of the gods. He turned his attention to the empire's oldest and most formidable enemy, the Sassanid Persian Empire. In the spring of 363, Julian assembled one of the largest Roman armies ever seen, some 65,000 elite troops, and launched a massive invasion of Persia. His plan was ambitious: to march down the Euphrates River, supported by a large fleet, and capture the Persian capital of Ctesiphon. The initial stages of the campaign were a brilliant success. The Roman army advanced deep into enemy territory, winning a series of skirmishes and capturing several fortresses. But the Persian king, Shapur II, was a wily and experienced opponent. He refused to be drawn into a decisive pitched battle, instead employing a scorched earth strategy. As the Romans advanced, they found the fields burned, the wells poisoned, and the canals destroyed. The great city of Ctesiphon proved too strong to take by storm. Julian's Roman fleet, his crucial supply line, was burned to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. He was now deep in hostile territory, with a dwindling food supply and a relentless enemy harassing his columns. He made the fateful decision to turn north, hoping to link up with another Roman army. It was a long, desperate march through the burning Mesopotamian desert. The philosophers end during the grueling retreat. The Roman army was under constant attack from Persian skirmishers. On June 26, 363, during one of these chaotic rearguard actions, Julian, ever the commander who led from the front, rushed into the fray without stopping to put on his heavy body armor. He was struck in the side by a thrown spear. The wound was deep and mortal. According to the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who was present on the campaign, Julian was carried back to his tent, where he met his end not as a soldier, but as a philosopher. Surrounded by his tearful friends and fellow scholars, he did not rage against his fate. Instead, he engaged them in a calm, philosophical discourse about the noble nature of the soul. He expressed his contentment that the gods had seen fit to grant him a clean and honorable death, rather than the slow decay of old age or the assassin's knife. Some later Christian accounts would invent a more dramatic, and likely false, last cry: "Vicisti Galilei, you have won, Galilean." But the truth was more profound. With his death, the pagan restoration died with him. His exhausted and leaderless army, trapped in Persia, was forced to elect a new emperor on the spot, a Christian officer named Jovian, who signed a humiliating peace treaty with Persia, ceding vast territories to secure the army's safe passage home. Julian the Apostate's reign had lasted less than 2 years. His bold, brilliant, and ultimately doomed attempt to reverse the course of history was over. The ghost of Olympus was laid to rest, and the Roman Empire would march inexorably toward its Christian future.